Everyone, open your Bibles to Deuteronomy 22:13 through 15. If a man takes a wife and after sleeping with her, dislikes her and slanders her and gives her a bad name, saying, I married this woman, but when I approached her, I did not find proof of her virginity. Then the young woman's father and mother shall bring to the town elders at the gate proof that she was a virgin. And I have some questions here. I'm a doctor. I know how archaic these methods were for determining somebody's virginity, and we've abandoned this barbaric practice for very good reason. But how would we even go about proving virginity, and why should anybody have to? If you want to defend this passage, you can call in today because I want to talk about it. But how do you defend this book as a whole? And if you think you can defend the Bible in general, call us because the show is starting now. Welcome to Talk Heathen. Today is Sunday, July 9th, 2023. I am your host, Dr. Ben, and joining me today is another doctor of a different variety of doctor, Dr. Richard Firth. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastically well, really, really well today. Very strange Sunday for some reason, but it's all good. It's all great. I'm trying to work out if I'm a virgin or not, but other than that, all is
fine. Yeah, this is the doctor versus doctor episode of Talk Heathen. So if you want to call in and make us argue with each other, you can also do that. I'd actually be curious if we have some. We're different types of doctors. We have an academic doctor here, and I'm a medical doctor. So you might have some. You might have a hard time getting us to fight with each other. But I don't know. I'm willing to go for it. But would you like to share a little bit about who you are with the audience today?
I'll try. I am a doctor of many things, but my main field is emotions and emotion psychology and history and anything to do with emotions, the philosophy of emotions, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm kind of an emotion expert. I've written about emotions a lot. I talk about emotions a lot. I'm quite an emotional person, if the truth be known. So well, you can try and make me cry if you like. It won't work. But that's my field. I'm all about the feelings, which is kind of unusual for this kind of a show. But yeah.
Yeah, but you actually brought up a point backstage that I really want to throw out there for anybody who wants to call in, because we talk a lot on this show about skepticism, obviously, and the use of logic. And you have an interesting perspective on this dichotomy of logic versus emotion. And do you want to share a little bit of your, you don't have to go super in detail, but just so the audience, if they want to call in and argue this particular point, I'd love to throw this out there.
This is a popular argument. We have known for some time now, for quite a long time, that you can't separate the emotional and the cognitive. They work together. They work in tandem. You feel things as well as think about things together. And there's this idea, and I blame Descartes. It's always Descartes' fault. But there's this idea that there is the thinking and there is the feeling. And it's just not true. My favorite anecdote about this was a guy who challenged me on this when I was talking about it. And he said, the thing is, I'm all about logic. I'm all about calculus. I love calculus. I was like, you do what now? And he didn't realize his drive for calculus was an emotional one. The reason he did it is because of the way it made him feel. And just most things have an entanglement like that, because emotions, feelings are how you navigate the world without having to think about it. You know, animals, most of what they do is because they feel something. They feel hungry, they feel horny, they feel hot, they feel cold. So they move. They can't sit there and think about something in abstract thought. So that's how we navigate. We've just got this prefrontal lobe that complicates everything because we're a bit weird. But yeah, it's call in and challenge me, because I do love talking about this topic. It's
definitely thing. This is a call-in show. Talk Heathen is a product of the atheist community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. And since this is a live call-in show, we do have open lines, so you can call in and challenge us on emotion versus logic, or on the demonstration of virginity, or even any other religious or skeptically related topics, we want to hear from you and we want to have these discussions. So call in at 512-991-9242, or you can go to your computer at tiny.cc/callth. So while we're getting people in the queue, we have a little segment that we do on this show called Talk Heathen to Me, and we're going to go over the question results from last time, and then we'll give you a new question for this week. So last week, we asked you to tell us, instead of plagues, God should have sent blank to end Egyptian slavery. And this is what you said. So in third place, we have from Bradley Holmes, God should have sent insurance agents to end the slavery. What do you think about that one, Richard?
I like that one. I mean, they should have just insured the slaves, and then they never let them been able to go. Would they? They'd have just been. They've been sorry. You can't. Your insurance doesn't cover running into the desert. So I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. So I think it would have worked, but I don't think it would have worked so well for Moses and his mates. So
probably not.
Yeah.
And number 2, we have from Winter's Scoop, to end slavery, God should have sent Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
That's a response. That's a response you have there, Richard.
Yeah, I'll not get into it. Just
like, tell us how you really feel about Chuck Norris.
He's an actor. That's where we'll leave it. Actually,
all right.
Even that's being generous.
Anyway, and in first place, our favorite one from last week is from Stephen Jackson. To end Egyptian slavery, instead of the plagues, God should have sent annoying missionaries. And I think this definitely deserves to be the number one answer. And I think this is hilarious.
Yeah. Well, he kind of did. He was called Moses. So, but imagine sending 50 Moseses. Just go. Take your snakes with you.
Door to door Moses.
Yeah.
What would you have answered for this question?
How God could have ended it. I think politicians, of any kind, just any politician of any kind, could have turned up and started to talk to him about politics, and I think he would have soon got very upset and just said, "Yeah, okay, just let them go." I don't know.
That's fair. That was me throwing you on the spot, because I really want to hear you answer this question of the week for this week. But this is for, like we just read, the top 3 responses from last week's question. You all can put your comments in the chat below, not in the chat on the side, in the comments below. So after the video, like after we're done with the live show and we post the video, you can go to the comment section below and write your responses. If you write it in the chat that's live right now, we're not going to see it. So don't put your responses. I mean, you can still put your responses there, but that's not how you qualify to win. You have to go and put it below the video later on. So the question for this week is, what are you calling dibs on when the Christians get raptured?
Well, every time I see a mega church, they've got the best music gear at the back, amazing guitars and stuff. I want every single goddamn guitar in every single one of those churches is mine. Okay, they're mine. They're dibs.
So we're gonna have Richard raiding the churches and just walking out with like all of these guitars. I imagine you going in with a shopping cart and just like walking out of a church with a shopping cart of guitars.
Yeah, every church. That'd be my life's work forever. I'll never get to play them. Oh well.
Yeah, but you make a very good point though about the equipment, because they have a lot of good lighting equipment, a lot of good microphones and camera equipment as well. So that is probably a good way to go.
Yeah, we could turn those theaters into theaters. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Oh wow, incredible.
Yeah.
But I want to know what you all think in the audience. So put your answers in the comments below. And next week, we're going to reveal the top 3 answers from this question. So We're still waiting for some people to call in. So
Come on.
bring us some arguments. And in the meantime, I am going to go back. And I do want to talk some more about the logic versus emotion thing. So this is your time now to go in as much detail as you want to. And I'll see if I have any questions or contention with it. But
well, I'm just curious. One of the things I often say is, and this was nicked off me by a writer friend of mine, but he doesn't matter. He said it was me. But people watching this, I'm going to assume we have a fair percentage of nerds. I hope so, because that's me. So we all know who Data is from Star Trek, Lieutenant Data. And my question is, before the emotion chip, let's get this right, early Data, how would Data choose an ice cream? Let's imagine they're all perfectly nutritionally identical. The only thing that's different is the flavor. How would Data have chosen or choose an ice cream? And because he has no emotion, he has no feeling, he probably wouldn't. He'd probably stand there and stare at the counter forever, just going like, how do I choose? Because he doesn't have a favorite. He doesn't have something that gives him more pleasure than something else. He has no rating system. They're just lumps of cold milk to him, So that's the kind of thing when I say that you need to have emotion as part of your judgment system, as your logic system, as your cognitive system. The reason we have a favorite ice cream, the reason we sit in a particular place on the bus, the reason we do most of the things that we do in our lives outside of drawing logic tables and doing complex mathematics, most of that stuff is driven by the way we feel about it because of some experience we had when we were young or at some time that was pleasant. So we now think, you know what, I like to sit on that slightly higher seat at the back of the bus that has the best view or whatever. And that's kind of how this works. And like ever since a psychologist called Antonio Damasio and his wife showed this to be the case, every single time it's ever been tested, it's been, yep, absolutely, you cannot separate the two. And like I say, even those things we like to do that seem very logical, we do them because we love them mostly. And so that's kind of my fascinating. I'd be interested if someone wants to call in and tell me what the emotional core of their religion is. I know we don't often ask that. We often ask, give us an argument, and we get your clams and all that. But come on, tell me the emotional thing, the thing that connects with you. Tell us what that is and why it matters to you, what it makes it so important. Because I'd quite like to chat about that, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and I'm curious too. It's something else I notice when we talk a lot to theists.
Yeah.
They'll often bring up arguments of you left religion because of emotion. There's something that you didn't like the church, or you had a bad experience, or you just hate God. And people will like to frame atheists as emotional to invalidate their reasoning for leaving. But I guess my question is, like, oftentimes when people do that, then the atheist might respond and try to say, well, no, I'm 100% objective in my decision to leave. It's all evidence-based. It's all data. But how would you respond to a theist who wants to use the emotional side as a reason to discredit an atheist? How does your perspective on emotion relate to how we engage with discourse?
I think it's very interesting because usually when a theist does this, when they come along and they say, well, it's only because you had an X emotion or Y emotion, that's why you left the church. It's because you hate God, or it's because you want to sin, you desire all these things. They're kind of, I hate to use the phrase projecting, but they are kind of projecting. It's the only emotional landscape they understand that would make sense to them for someone to leave. But they are kind of right. What usually happens, the emotion is usually somebody who was very religious starts to look into the actual data and the information. And sooner or later, they realize, hang on, this doesn't add up anymore. And at that point, you're damn right, there's an emotion. People are pissed off. And they go, I'm sick of this. And which is why you get the meme of the angry atheist. Well, to begin with, you can be quite angry when someone's been lying to you your whole life. That happens. Most of us calm down and chill out and start to go, well, let's have a more calm discourse. But there is an emotional contingent, and it's that feeling of being breaking away. It's very, very hard though. I'm going to go and get chemical now. There are two important chemicals when it comes to belongingness, when it comes to groups. One is called oxytocin. You've probably heard of that. It's the love drug. It isn't really, but it's a chemical that is to do with how we bond with people. It increases when we come close to people we care about. And the more we care about them, the more the brain produces this particular neuropeptide. And there's another one called vasopressin. It's a very similar thing. This is given off as well. And you can measure it in your dogs and cats. When you come home, dogs tend to produce more of these two chemicals. When they see you, it goes off the chart. Cats, not so much, but it's there. They're like, oh, cool, and off they go. But in humans, it's quite important. We are a group animal. And so to have a group that is producing these two chemicals, and one of them is about belongingness and clinging, the other one's more about protection and protecting your group from others. That's massive simplification, but just bear with me here. When you've got a group and you've had these chemicals surging through your system toward them, and you realize these people have perhaps unintentionally or intentionally been lying to you or not telling you the truth, or that they're wrong, that causes a great deal of confusion. It causes a great deal of turmoil. And so there is a huge emotional element when those two chemicals drop towards a group they used to go high for. It can create, for example, the emotion of disgust is quite linked to the suppression of oxytocin. So rather than something being wonderful and beautiful that you want to hug, you suddenly hate it and want to get away from it. And that can cause that. So they can call in and say, oh, you're only an atheist because of your emotions. And I'll say, well, partly, yeah. But why, or the mechanism you're talking about, you're wrong about. It's not just like, I hate God. No, we just don't believe there's a God. If there's hate anything, we hate that we feel like we're being conned for a long, long time by people we thought were our group, our tribe, our people, you know? So yeah, that's what I think about that. That's what I think about that whole, the emotion argument of atheism. I mean, I was raised an atheist, so I didn't go through that. I was the guy who, when I was at school, when I was about 8, my teacher taught us about the 50 loaves of fishes and the bread and stuff. And I put my hand up and said, yeah, you sure only one kid brought a packed lunch and got detention? But that's a whole other story. But yes, there is an emotion element. So tell us your emotional element, callers. Come on, I want to hear it.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And we do have a caller on the lines. Excellent. We still have some open lines for people want to get their calls in about anything. We're here to discuss. But let's talk to Dominic from California. Sounds like you want to ask about what we think God is. Is that an accurate representation of your question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask what you personally thought, or what this idea you have of God is, so that I could help understand atheists a bit more.
Well, here's the problem, is that if you ask any number of religious people, you're going to get a different response on who God is for pretty much any one of those people. So I don't even know if there is a coherent definition of what God is, because it's so subjective to the person. So instead of addressing the question in this way, maybe I'm more curious to hear what your definition of God is, and then we can address if we accept or don't accept that particular definition.
All right. Well, first, I want to address what I think most people think God is, the God of the Bible, who is clearly a God of contradiction and hypocrisy. And what I think people have got to understand is that the God of the Bible is based on plagiarized polytheistic deities. And when I'm talking about God, I'm not talking about any of these polytheistic deities that the God of the Bible, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever you want to call them, is based on. The actual God of creation, it's like it's the underlying force of consciousness that is all around us. So literally everything and everyone is a part of God. Kind of a way to look at it would be kind of like things in a video game or cells in your body are part of the game or part of you, but they're not the entirety of the makeup of you or the game. So God is essentially just the underlying consciousness that is everywhere at
How
once.
do we know?
And
How do we know there's an underlying consciousness?
Well, it's something that people do struggle with, and I'll be honest, something that I've learned is that the very language we speak of, or that we use to communicate, can't actually really describe what this consciousness is fully. All we can do is describe it to the best of our ability. So,
But how do you, other than describing it, how do you know that this exists at all?
Well, the only way to do that is to look within yourself. Know yourself and then try to correlate the patterns that you find within yourself and how they relate to the larger picture, the world around you, the actual universe. And if you do that enough, you will come to the realization that all is consciousness. That's really the only way I can describe it, of how to come to that realization.
Richard, I want to let you get in here. I have a lot of thoughts, but I want to make sure you get to say your piece.
It sounds like an interesting pantheist, panpsychism medley going on here. I just don't know how, I mean, other than looking into yourself and coming to that conclusion, I do that a lot. I look into myself and come to the conclusion that I'm 6'2" and incredibly handsome. It doesn't mean it's actually the case. So what else have you got? What kind of observations can you give me that I can do? I can see, I can point to and go, oh, I see what you mean. I see how that consciousness links. So what have you got?
Well, one thing to look at it, I think from a material perspective would be realizing that everything around us is all made of the same thing. Everything's made of atoms. Everything's made of molecules. And all these molecules and atoms were essentially forged in stars. And that's one way to realize that we are actually connected with nature in a much deeper way than we actually realize, or most people realize.
I don't think that point demonstrates that at all.
No.
I don't see how being made of the same substances means that there's a deeper connection. Like you're drawing lines between dots that I'm not convinced need to be connected or are connected. And I don't know if it seems like I'm not ready to take that jump with you. I don't know if it's you're not ready to admit that you don't know if there is any deeper meaning or something, and you want something to be there, and so you say it. But I'm not convinced that these need to be linked, or they are, and just suggesting that we're made of the same things, therefore there's this deeper meaning or a deeper consciousness, which I'm still confused about what that even is. I don't see how that's linkable at all. So how confident are you that this kind of universal consciousness exists? What if I had to ask you to make a bet on this being true or not? What was that?
There's no doubt in my mind.
So you're 100% confident that this is true. What makes you that confident?
Understanding things like natural law and realizing that things like that simply just could not have come from randomness or nothing.
So it's your answer is because you don't see any other thing that could be possible. This has to be the one. what makes you convinced that your thought process is absolutely correct in this and that you're not missing something?
Well, similar to how laws on earth are created, they come from a source, a mind. This corresponds with the law of mentalism, of Hermeticism, which is everything
We don't
mental.
know that, though. I'm not willing to go with you that everything
But
has a mind or comes from a mind.
would you agree? Would you agree with me that everything you see around you, all the buildings, for example, that those existed in someone's mind before they actually came into being? That they actually envisioned what these buildings would look like?
The object didn't exist. The idea of the object did, but those are separate entities.
In their mind.
But the object did not exist in their mind. The concept existed in their mind. The image maybe existed in their mind. But how many times have you thought of something in your mind and then tried to put it into practice and it just doesn't work? Like, there are many things, like if I was trying to build a structure out of Lego and I imagined like, hey, this would be a really cool structure to build, but then I start actually making it and like, oh, actually, this structure is not going to stand using the structure I had in my mind. Like there's a disconnect sometimes between like what you know and what is. And I think it's important that we don't get overly confident in our like mental ability to think through those things, because there's a lot of things that I don't know. And probably the most dangerous thing is what you don't know that you don't know. And what it sounds like to me is that in this situation, you don't know what you don't know. And so you're asserting something. And it kind of, I'm curious about how you can be so convinced that you know that you're not missing something in this scenario.
Well, let's take your Lego example. Okay. It is similar to discovering the truth. That is that you have this structure idea of what you think the truth is or what you want the building to be. And then you go about actually working at it and you find that, well, this didn't work the way I thought it did, or this wasn't the way I thought it was. And then you have to work to align your perceptions, or in the case of building something, your labors, with the way that it actually is or should be.
Right. So this sounds kind of, well, this kind of goes against what you were saying with you being 100% confident that your perspective on this is correct. But I'm just like, you just said that if you go in and you start learning more and then you change your perspective based on the new information you learn. And so you didn't know something, you get more information, and then you change your mind. But that's going to impact your confidence level, right? And even going into that Lego structure, I probably wasn't 100% confident. Even if I was fairly sure it would work, I don't know if there's many things I would get to 100% confidence on. But how did you arrive at this level of confidence when, like, do you see where I'm going with this? Does that make sense? Richard, do you have...
from... Was there something Richard wanted to say?
No, go ahead. I wasn't sure if he was trying to jump in.
I will in a minute. Dominic, say what you were saying. I'm just curious about something, but finish your thought. Has he gone?
What was the question?
Shall I say?
Sorry, I kind of.
Shall I say what I was saying, and we'll go for what I'm curious when I'm listening to you, Sam. Do you think the individual pieces of Lego have consciousness in this situation?
Yes. Everything or every inanimate object around you is in some way conscious, just not on the level that we are.
So we're talking panpsychism, that everything right down to the most basic atom has some level of consciousness, some level of awareness.
I've never heard it called that, but yes.
Yeah, look it up. It's very interesting. Called panpsychism. Then what is assembling the Lego? Is the Lego assembling itself, or is it an outside force assembling the Lego?
So the way I understand it, with the way God created the universe, is he thought it into existence, or it's not, God's not really a he, it has no gender. If the God thought of the universe and it set in stone certain laws and certain ways that are just inherent and unchangeable. And these are the things that we come to discover over time and learn. And at this point in human history, many people have discovered these things, like natural law, which is one of the most important things to understand God and what God actually expects of us as human beings.
I'm still curious as to whether the Legos are assembling themselves as an external force, because you kind of seem to be sitting on the fence and saying they're assembling themselves and it's an external force. And I want to know which it is, because either everything has a consciousness and that is God, or there is a God that brought this thing into being. And I can't see how you can mesh these two. And this is before I even object to the whole thing, which I mind in a minute. But that in there, I'm like, you've got to pick one, surely.
Well, one thing to look at it, you can look at it like the universe is essentially God having a physical experience, or spirit having a physical experience. So that from what I understand of God is his whole purpose from us is to basically gather information, collect whatever information it needs to collect for whatever purpose that God has or planet has. I don't know that. I just assume that it's good. And it collects the information so that it can come to the conclusion of whatever its divine plan is. And it does that by experiencing its creation subjectively through us and everything around us.
All right. So how do you know any of that? How did you arrive at that whole thing?
Because I have listened to and read occultists, and the thing that the occultists say and the ancients say, to me, make more sense than what modern scientists say or what really any
basically
has to say on this subject.
So basically what you're saying is that it made sense to you, so that's obviously the right answer. That's very, I don't know, like that sounds very overly confident to me.
It's not necessarily that it just that just made sense to me. It made more sense than everything else. And through that, through using my intellect to decipher this ideology or this belief and what does this have to offer, and my intuition together, I was able to come to this conclusion.
So can intuition be wrong?
When you use it in a balanced way with intellect, it is a useful tool. You must balance intuition.
So if you're going to balance it with intellect, what intellect did you use to balance out your intuition with regard to this? So we have this subjective portion that it makes sense to you. But if you're even saying that we need the intellectual component, what is that component? What does that look like?
Well,
for you, like what convinced you intellectually?
It was looking. Well, if you really want to get to when I first started to question things, it was when I was in my religion and they changed the Bibles. And I was like, well, why did they do that? And they basically said to dumb them down and make it easier for people to understand. And that didn't really sit right with me. And so ever since then, I've been very interested in discovering the truth. And through using and discovering methods like the trivium, I suggest you look into the trivium if you haven't. I was able to come to this conclusion, which is what I was just talking about God.
So I have a question though, because I think this is where we're stuck. Because you keep essentially going back to like this. I agree with this thing more than all of these other things. Is there a possibility that there are options outside of the options you've looked at?
Likely, but I'm quite confident that I've found people who.
So then how can we rule out the possibility? How can we say then, like, is it like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy for this, but like,
well, like I said, it's objectively looking at the whole picture.
But how can you look at the? But how can you? But how can you look at the whole picture if you only assume that what you know is the whole picture? Like, if you're looking at, like, I guess it's kind of like that analogy where you have like two blind men and they're both like petting an elephant and one person's petting the trunk, and they say they're describing the trunk of the elephant and they think like, oh, this must be like a garden hose or something because of how it's thin and long and rough. And it's like you have another person that's touching like another part of the elephant and says, no, it's not thin, like it's actually like very broad and all this stuff. You have totally different perspectives of this elephant, but neither one of them is looking at the entire elephant. So how do we know that you're looking at the entire elephant? And if you're not, how do we know that the component that you're looking at is the most important one, or the one that matters, or is the true perspective? Like, it's a lot of confidence to say that your perspective and your study and your intuition is the right one, and that it's so unlikely that you're missing any other pieces of this puzzle. I want to know what convinced you that much.
Well, look, it does require a bit of faith, and the only faith that you need to have is that we're not like these blind men. We do have.
How do you know that?
Tools.
How do you know, though?
I'm going to explain in a moment. We do have the tools necessary to understand what God actually wants from us, because if we didn't, we wouldn't be, have such an understanding of things like music or art or engineering. If we can understand those things, there's no reason we shouldn't be able to understand what the creator of the universe wants from us. And the way we can understand that is by understanding natural law.
Richard, it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, I'm a little bit puzzled by this whole thing, because from what I got is that you read some old stuff and some modern sort of esoteric shamanist stuff, and it just felt nicer. You just thought that sits better.
That wasn't all I looked into.
Okay, and what did you look into? Because when you say natural law, what do you mean? Are we talking natural laws in a Hobbesian sense of how humans ought to behave and gather, or are we talking about physics?
I'm talking about the laws that the Creator set in place that govern behavior for beings with the capacity to understand them. These laws are as real as any of the physical laws.
There's a problem with this, though, because you're saying that all of this is based on the natural laws, which are, again, unfalsifiable, because you're saying the definition of the natural law is something that God came up with. How do we prove God? It sounds like we're going in a circle.
Yeah,
because if we have to use the natural law, which is God made, to then prove God.
The way we can prove that is if we go back to what I was talking about last week about how man has taken over and they think that they know what's best and they reject God's law. All we need to do is observe the effects that this has created. And quite clearly,
how can I reject a God's law that has no evidence of existing at all?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I don't know if I'm rejecting something, I don't know what I'm rejecting, because you haven't really presented what all of this is.
Yeah.
What is God's law? Like, can you give me some specifics? Like, I feel like a lot of this conversation is so very vague, and kind of wishy-washy. Can you tell us some specific parts of this natural law that God has made?
Natural law is just basically understanding the objective difference between right and wrong action.
That doesn't
Right
mean
and wrong
anything.
action.
Tell me
This is
what is right.
Yes,
Give me examples or definitions of
okay.
what is right and wrong. What does that mean?
Wrong actions, or I should say anything that is a right action is anything that is not a wrong action. And a wrong action is any action that causes harm onto another person. And as far as I know, there are seven wrong actions that a person can commit. And it's beyond that.
Only 7.
Anything else is theoretically, yes, anything beyond those is theoretically a right.
Okay, so what are these 7?
Yeah.
And so you're claiming that everything wrong falls into these 7. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so give me the 7.
Murder, theft, assault, rape, trespass, lying or deceit, and coercion. These are the 7 things that no one has a right to do because they directly interfere with someone else's freedom to freely express themselves in the physical universe, which is not something anyone has a right to do.
Except I can think of reasons why you might want to do all but 2 of those. A war covers most of them, especially if it's a war for the right reasons. So trespass. You're going into another person's country without their permission to try and stop them from being a tyrant and invading someone else. Murder. Well, that's kind of what you're doing there, really. Theft. You're taking often their material, using them against them. These can be argued by people, maybe not me, but by people, to be a moral right in the right circumstance. So how can there be absolute wrongs? I'm curious.
Well, one thing to understand as well is a yin and yang principle is that it's basically do no harm and take no shit. So you be prepared to not initiate harm. If you don't do any of those things, then odds are nothing bad or no harm will come to you. Or
so are there gray areas in any of this?
But hold.
Are there gray areas in any of this, Dominic?
No.
There's no gray areas with right and wrong. Is that what you are saying?
Yes. Yes. It's very clear, and if people understood this, there'd be a lot less chaos in the world. But I'm trying to explain the second principle, which is the art or the act of self-defense, which is
I don't
in the world.
Okay.
So there is a gray area, self-defense.
Yeah, that you just described a gray area.
No, if there's someone else who is initiating these wrongs that I'm talking about, then you have a right to go out and stop them. So like the Nazis, for example, they were out killing a bunch of people. Yes, you did have a right to go over there and stop them and kill people in war if it was a result on stopping them. When
these come into conflict, that I would consider that to be a gray area, is when right and wrong come into conflict with each other. And there are plenty of situations like that I deal with on a regular basis. There are times when you have to violate somebody's autonomy, potentially. And there are cases when, you have minors. There's a lot of legal issues regarding minors because they might not want a certain medical procedure done for them, but if something is life-saving, we will often violate the autonomy of a child in order to save their life because they're not intellectually capable at that stage of making their own life or death decisions. So that's a gray area where we've said, as a society, we value the lives of children, and we're going to intervene and say that we're going to have implied consent for minors in emergency situations. With an adult, we'd have a different metric for that because adults can make that decision. So if an adult wants to say, I don't want a blood transfusion because I'm a Jehovah's Witness, they are allowed to make that decision. Whereas when it's a minor, we're less likely to let that decision go through because that borders on child abuse in that sense. So I think I think your lack of nuance in any of this is problematic. And I think, number one, like your initial assertion saying that you are 100% confident in your viewpoint, and then now saying that there's no gray areas, I think you really need to think more about your own. Like, I think, like, this is going to sound harsh, but I think you need some self-awareness in what you don't know. I think you are overestimating what you know, and that's really scary to me. Like, so I have a medical degree. I'm a resident physician, and I make a lot of decisions for people. And like, there's a lot of things that I know about the human body and how it works, but I don't think I'm ever going to be 100% confident on anything, because if I'm wrong, like, and there are cases where I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is a minor thing, and I'm pretty sure that they can go home and they're not going to die later this evening, but I don't know for sure. And so every single case, no matter how benign it seems, I have to go back and say, what am I missing? And I talk with colleagues, I talk with mentors, say, am I missing something here? Because this stuff matters. Like, having that awareness of what I don't know is so important. And I think maybe we're going to end this call here, because I would love for you to think about some of these things and come back next week and we can continue this discussion. But I really hope you'll look at why you're that confident.
I don't know. I just want to say there is a lot of things that I do know I don't know, or I don't know. But I am confident in saying that there is a creator of the universe, and that we can know or come to understand what the creator expects of us.
So bring us evidence. So next time, bring us evidence that's beyond just saying that you know because you thought about it and you know. So bring us something else that would convince me. Yeah. All right. And I'm gonna let you go, because this was a great call. But this was a very long call. So gonna hang up there.
Yeah.
That was very interesting, though. I do hope that they call back. I do. Yeah. What's your final thoughts?
It was very muddled. I'm still unsure as to whether this God is an external thing that does stuff, or whether it's everything. He seemed to not be able to work that one out. I know that there is a God who is a creator, but everything is God. Well, what? It either externally created this, or it is this. So it created itself. Okay.
Yeah. I hope they call back next time, because I'd love to continue that kind of discussion.
Yeah, and if you're watching, look up panpsychism, because there's some very good discussion and argument as to the idea that everything has some level of awareness, and you don't need God for it. So you can just look at the ideas there and get a more nuanced idea of that sort of element. And read Spinoza.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I'm going to get through some more announcements before we take another call. So, are you all ready for an amazing event at the end of August, the annual Bat Cruise on Saturday, August 26th, 2023. And you can join the atheist community of Austin for a fun summer evening on the water, conversing with like-minded free thinkers. And you can meet Forrest Valkai, J. Mike, and other hosts of ACA shows. And they'll be on board to mingle and chat throughout the whole 2-hour cruise around Lady Bird Lake. The cruise will pause at Congress Avenue Bridge at sundown for the emergence of the world's largest urban bat colony. Get your tickets now at tiny.cc/batcruise. And we also have some super chats that I want to read. So you can, if you want us to read your super chats live on the show, you can submit those throughout the day today, and we will read them out for everybody to hear. And of course, we have our usual frequent super chatter. Greg Markowski gives $4.99 and says, "Thanks for the great show." Well, thank you, Greg, once again for your contribution. And you still have the title for most frequent super chatter. So you'll keep that title until somebody unseats you for the most frequent super chatter. We also have one from Ben9 who gives $4.99, and I don't see a comment for that one, but thank you for your super chat. We greatly appreciate it. I am going to get to some more announcements since we had kind of a longer call. I'm going to give some of these. We do, if you want to show off how much you love the ACA to all of your friends and all of your family, we have merch. and it's a great way to support Talk Heathen and the ACA. So every month we have a limited edition t-shirt, and this one is science, because the answer never turned out to be magic ever. So if you want this amazing limited edition shirt, you can go to tiny.cc/merchaca to get that shirt and all this other super cool merch. If you want to support the show but don't have the ability to support financially, or just don't want to, that is totally valid. You can please click the like button below the video and subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and comment below on your favorite call or your favorite host. You can tell me that I'm your least favorite host, and that's totally welcome if you want to do that in the comment section. You can become a channel member. If you click the join button below the video, you'll get custom chat emotes, and you'll help perpetuate the mission of Talk Heathen and the ACA. And like I mentioned already, you can send a super chat with a question or a comment, and we will read them live on air. And if you have a question, we can answer those questions. So that's a great way. If you want to ask a question but don't want to call in, that is a wonderful way that you can do that without having to hear your voice on the show. So what do you say we move on to our next caller? We do have another theist on the line.
Oh, goody.
All right. So we're going to talk to GB. Pronouns are he, him, from California. And it sounds like you want to talk about the possibility of atheists being saved. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. So, okay, there's this idea within Christianity. I'm sure you've heard it a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to be saved, gotta trust Christ, right? So, I mean, what does that mean to you guys? I just had to ask you.
Not very much.
Yes, I came from a Christian background. I was raised in evangelical Christianity, and back when I was a Christian, I would say that meant that you needed to, number one, believe that God existed, and that you'd have to believe, at least in my particular denomination, you needed to believe that Jesus Christ came to earth and sacrificed himself to redeem you of sin. And then you had to, you didn't necessarily have to have works, but it was like, if you did good works, that was evidence that you were truly saved, because the passage, faith without works is dead. So that's what I would say. Like, but now looking at this, I'm curious about what you think, because then maybe I can address your specific. Can you tell me what you define trust in God to be, so that I can make sure I'm responding to the correct argument?
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to say, excellent. I agree with you, right? Everything that what you said was absolutely true. However, okay, and this is usually a point of contention between atheist and theist, right? But I would like to, I guess, persuade you to just move on past this first point. And if I can make the second point, it would make, I don't know if
hold on though. I don't want to move past the first point though. Like, can you tell me what does it mean to trust God? Like, what's your definition?
I don't want to move on past it either. I was just, just warning you ahead of time where I just want to be honest to you. So the idea is this, right? The first part, you said two things, right? First one is to trust in Christ is to believe in God. And the second one is to be a good person. I agree with both of these points that you made. That's what I think too. However, right? And so I know not everyone likes this, right? But by default, the Bible says that you do already believe in God, right? And I believe you that you say that you don't. I believe that when you say you don't, I understand what you mean. You do not have sufficient evidence to believe in God. I believe you. I believe that you don't have it, right? Otherwise, you would believe. But regardless of whether or not you have the evidence, the Bible makes that claim that you already do. So technically, you've got that first part.
Right. So the Bible's wrong. Yeah. So what you're admitting there is that the Bible's wrong.
Okay, you can say on when you look at it at a certain point, yeah, you can say the Bible's wrong, right? The Bible's wrong because you have a different definition of truth and evidence, and you.
No, I don't have a different definition of truth and evidence. I do. The Bible claims, which I'm curious about what specific passage you're referencing, but But like, if the Bible claims that we all have a belief in God, and then I tell you I don't have a belief in God, those are contradictory statements, right? So one of them has to be false.
Well, I believe you. Well, I believe you. I believe you don't believe in God. I'm not gonna call you a liar. I'm not telling you.
So then how can these be? So then how can these both be true? If you believe me that I don't believe in God, how can both these statements exist? One of them has to be wrong. Are you? So it sounds like you're probably asserting that. Are you asserting that I'm wrong? That I don't believe?
No, I believe within the evidence and the things that you know about this universe in reality, that you have determined there is no evidence for God. That's the truth, right? Like there is, or at least not compelling evidence, or whatever, right? The point is that I want to extend the benefit of the doubt. You don't believe in God because you don't believe there's sufficient evidence, right?
Right. So I don't believe in God, but the Bible says I do believe in God. So which one of us is wrong?
So maybe I messed up, right? So I guess the idea is that you don't believe in God. I agree, but God still exists, right? So just because we don't believe in him, the idea is that like God is still real, whether or not we believe in him or not.
Okay,
right?
so that's an assertion. That's an assertion. Which you have to back up.
And right. And I'm not saying that God is real. I'm just saying let's look at it past this point, right? Okay, let's just concede that God is real, but we don't have.
No, I don't want to concede that point. I don't want to concede that point. Richard, do you want to jump in here?
Well, the idea. Well, oh yeah, so go ahead.
Well, I'm just. There is a contradiction here. Now, if you're going to tell me in a moment that you're not one of these bibliolaters who believes who worships the Bible and thinks every word is absolutely true, then hot off to you. That's what Christianity has believed until actually quite recently, generally, that the Bible was a kind of a guide, but written by humans, so mostly a bit rubbish. That's why. It's a long story, but that's why we ended up with science, so that people could try and find God without looking at the book. But anyway, if that's what you're telling me, then okay. But I don't understand why the Bible has any relevance then. Are you trying to say that there is evidence out there, and if only we'd find it in the right way, then we would believe? We just haven't found that evidence yet. If that's the case, then yeah, but we haven't found that evidence yet.
Right.
Some lost.
Agreed. And this is where I'm just trying to move on to the main point, because the main discussion that I want to have with y'all is, okay, if we can admit that the Bible claims that God is real, whether people believe in him or not, right? Whether even his own people that he chose out specifically believe in him or not, or obey him, right? But so if we can move on past this point, I would like to try to entertain the idea that the Bible actually says what was the second point is much more important. Right? Because the Bible makes the claim that even demons know of God's existence. They cannot deny it. And yet they're going straight to hell. They're going to spend eternity without him. And why? Because they did not do good things. They did evil things. And this is, I think, what I basically wanted to open this dialogue to, right? What does it mean to trust in Christ? Does it mean to trust in Christ just to believe certain things about God, to believe that he's real? Or does trusting in Christ really mean being like Christ and loving people and trying to forgive people and trying to, these things that I think that a lot more atheists have in common with the true message of what Christianity teaches, despite the fact that they don't believe. So I don't know. I wanted to open this all, and I heard you say something. So let me.
Yeah. When I was a Christian, I had that similar talking point of that even the demons know that God exists, and so why are these demons going to hell if they believe in God? So belief in God wasn't the only thing that mattered to me when I was a Christian. You had to commit your life to God. That's what I assumed that it meant. And you had to follow, like you're saying, you had to follow Christ and what he said. But so there's a couple of things here. Is number one, I don't believe in God. So, and you said we're moving past that point. I'm okay to move past that point too at this point. But the difference is I don't think, like, when I do good things, I'm not doing them because I'm trying to serve God, because I don't believe God exists. These are things that I do because I value humanity and I value doing things that I would want to have done to me, or I don't see how just doing things that we all agree are good would mean that I'm necessarily following Christ. Like, I mean, if that was enough to like save me if I needed to be saved, like, cool. Then if that's the only thing that I needed, then why do people need to evangelize to me? Like, if I'm already on the right track, right? Is there even a need to believe?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold on to that question. I also want to be fair of the other soloist thing. But great question and great points.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. I'm thinking, what is the point of the Bible, of Jesus, of the New Testament? If all you got to, if this God exists, all you got to do is kind of be a nice person, and you'll be in heaven. Well, great, because that's what I want to be. I'd like to think I'm a nice person. I try to be a nice person. I try to be open and loving and kind, and I don't need any of that. It doesn't matter. I don't even need, and this is a big shocker to a lot of Christians, heaven to do that. I just do it anyway because I want to make my life, my one life I have, my one important life, as good as possible. And I've worked out being nice to people is the best way to do that. So I'm kind of lost as to if that's the path to heaven, what does the Jesus thing matter? And also, I not like Jesus. I don't have tantrums in churches, but I think they're a great place for a market. I don't support capital punishment. There's lots of things me and Jesus would disagree on fundamentally. So I don't get it. I don't get what's the baggage do? Can I just be nice and then heaven or not, having lived a good life? Does it matter?
I think, okay, so the Catechism of the Catholic Church, right, makes it pretty clear. It says that if it is with beyond your capabilities to believe, then it's beyond your capabilities, right? You view the world through, evidence and through things you can trust and verify, and you don't have that for God, right? But despite the fact that you don't have that for God, you still do things that God approves of in the Bible, right? You are moral people. You care about, I don't know, the environment or whatever, but I guess the idea is that if God is a righteous moral judge, then he has an obligation to not pick favorites just because they believe in him and just because they do lip service and go to service all the time, right? Like, what good does it do to you if you do all those things and yet you neglect the very things that God cares about over and over again, which is to care about people and to really, to not be hateful and to be forgiving and these things. So I don't know. Maybe I feel like we didn't really make.
So then why do we?
The idea is that.
Yeah.
So then why do we need evangelism at all? Should Christians just leave us alone then because it doesn't matter?
Let me ask you guys. I think you guys have been around these circles a lot more than I do. Okay, so if we can concede these two things, right? Let's just concede God is real and that he cares about us.
I don't want to concede that, but like hypothetically, if God were real.
Okay. Yes, hypothetically, if God were real and he was a righteous moral judge that did not show partiality or played favorites, that changes things, right? That changes a lot of things, I believe, about what we know about God, and that actually every action, every thought really does matter to him. He's going to bring it to judgment, right?
See, that's a nice thought, though. That's a nice thought, but there are some problems, though, because God isn't impartial. And a great example of this is like you go to all of these very obviously good things, things that the Bible says are good that overlap with what a lot of atheists do. But I'm going to be vulnerable here and say, like, I go against the Bible's values in the fact that I'm queer. So like, and I didn't get to choose that. So if I go against God's plan, and if he says, well, you can't be queer, and a lot of people, especially a lot of Christians, have told me that is a hell-worthy offense. Like, how could God be impartial if there are people like me who something that was very difficult? I was raised in a church where people would say, like, basically you have to confess your queerness to your pastor and just pray the gay away. And you sit there and you think about yourself. And a big part of my deconversion was the fact that I knew that no matter how hard I tried, I could not meet the standard that God had for me because of the fact that I was queer. Like, even if I did everything else right, even if I believed in God, did everything he said, if I honored the Great Commission, everything that was listed in the Bible, even if I did all of that, because of the fact that I was queer, I would have had to make the choice of abandoning myself completely and just not be who I am as a person and forfeit a lot of what makes me me.
Yeah.
For the sake of this deity. Whereas people I know that aren't queer didn't have to have that thought process of I'm like messed up, I'm disgusting, why am I like this? Like, I would rather not be alive than have to live as this person that God doesn't want because of something that's totally outside of my control. So like, it's great to think of like, yeah, we overlap on a lot of these things, but there's some key points that the church and atheists, like, I can't even say all atheists because there are plenty of atheists that are very homophobic as well. But like with these points of contention, like, what does that mean for somebody like me?
Mm.
It's a really profound question, to be honest. Before I answered, was there anything else that the host wanted to say?
Not really. I mean, he's just highlighting my biggest issue with this is that you've got a problem that the Bible and the whole Jesus religion thing becomes completely irrelevant and meaningless if this God just says, "Oh, you've been nice, I'm going to let you in." But also, if you're saying we have to be like Jesus and be like God, well, in modern day, I don't think Jesus and his beliefs, or at least the beliefs he's said to have, are very nice. And Ben just demonstrated one very, very graphically there. You know, I can't be that like he wants me to be because I don't like a lot of the things that he wants me to like. In fact, I actively despise many of them. So you've got two little contradictory problems here. And I think it comes from a good place. I think you come from a good place of, you know, it's everyone can go in as long as you're nice. But when it's one of those, when you get into the weeds, there are all sorts of issues. Do you think?
Yeah, I'll let you have some time to respond, GB.
Yeah.
Okay, well, those are, I mean, two different points, but two valid points. And I'll go ahead and just try to fairly just say that, look to the first part, right? Being gay, right? This idea of same-sex attraction. I believe you. I believe that it's real. I believe that you have it. And I believe that you've even tried to not want it. You've prayed about it, most likely, to get it taken away. And yet it remains, right? From what I can tell is this. Imagine that this universe, for whatever reason, existed the way it did, but it operated with one slight difference, right? That there was no sex drive. Imagine that there was no sexual desire.
Well, that wouldn't impact me because I'm gay
Yeah.
and trans. So even if you take sex drive away from it, I'm still queer.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the idea is this. Imagine if there was a world where there was just no sex happening. Is my point. Regardless of whatever attractions you might have had. If there was just, for some reason, no desire to have sex, although even if you still had attraction or whatever, the idea is this. There would be no difference. There would be no difference. And I think that this is what the Bible continually teaches, is that God loves us, despite the fact that part of us does desire things that he doesn't. You know, and that
no, but the problem is, though, it's not just that I'm desiring something that he doesn't desire. If God made me, he made me trans. Like, he made me a person whose gender identity in my brain does not align with the body I was given. And so God's messed up for making me have to go through, like, made me in a way that I'm like this. And then it's like, that's bad. So no matter how you frame that, God didn't want me from the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, that's a whole other thing. And just to be fair, I don't think that you're. I just don't want to say that your point is like mute, right? I think that it deserves to be.
No, it's something that you need to confront in your perspective, because like you can't say that God is impartial, because there are people that he has absolutely fucked over.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So I feel like you're making good points, but going any further would mean that I just want to also answer the other co-host's point.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. So I mean, honestly, I kind of lost my train of thought, anyways. But yes, okay. Maybe I should just leave it at that, and to say that maybe you guys have thought about this and done this a lot more than I have, and
But I have to say though,
that is not a part. Yes.
Yeah, no, I have to say though, GB, like this was a very good call.
Yes.
Like I would love to hear from you again, and I think every host would love to hear from you at some point, because like there are things that we disagree on, and I think that the way you're able to handle the discussion was very genuine.
Yes.
and you're actually thinking about the questions that are being posed, and I think there's value to this conversation. So I don't want you to walk away and think that we hate you or that we just want to argue and things. No, but I value this conversation, and I think that there are some takeaways for all of us from the discussion that was had here. So I would love for you to call back another time.
I appreciate that. Okay, yeah. I guess I'll just say bye and then close. Did you want to change? I'm so sorry. I didn't look at anyone's name. Usually, I always just think it's Matt Dillhunty and someone else. But that's okay. That's how far removed I am from the times. Okay, like I'm just.
Yeah, we got a lot of new hosts now. I'm Ben, and this is Richard. There's also another Richard who you'll probably talk to at some point if you call back. But yeah, I definitely love to hear from you. But thank you for calling in today. This was a great call.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Have a good day, guys.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you, GB.
That was really nice.
Yeah,
I
it was. I mean, I think he's coming from a good place. Really, he's coming from a very nice place of wanting to kind of. I feel like there's something going on in him, like he's trying to square a circle in his beliefs of how can good people go to hell, the classic, and that's, I feel, a wrestle going on there. So hopefully he'll think some more and work it out. And we're here for him if he wants to come back and help work it out. Yeah.
And now is the time where we're going to, before we get to the top 5 patrons, I want you to know if you want to be on the list for the top 5 patrons that we read off every week, you can do that by going to Patreon at tiny.cc/PatreonTH. So every week we're going to read off the top 5, and this list changes. So if you become one of the top 5 patrons, you can see your name on this list. But Richard, would you like to read the top 5 for this week?
I'll give it a go. I apologize in advance. I'll blame my Britishness. So I'm going to count down. So at number 5, we have Kalev Halveti. At number 4, Devor Valjin or Valjin. One day I'll tell you my whole surname and he will let me off. Number 3 is Oops, all singularity. That's an awesome name. Oh, I like that. Number 2 is Ayami. And at number 1, at the top of this week's patron charts, is Dingleberry Jackson. And an honorable mention to LB.
Thank you everybody who are patrons and who are frequently our top 5 patrons of the week. It's cool to see your names in the show every week. But if you want to get on that list, you can go to Patreon and you can make that happen. We also have a channel that houses all of the shows of the ACA in audio podcast form, and you can check that out by going to tiny.cc/AEN podcast. You can also become part of the Talk Heathen community in our fan-run Facebook page at tiny.cc/FBTHG. Also, in case you didn't know, Talk Heathen has a TikTok, and we go there live before the shows on Sunday. Usually it's Richard because he's very good at that. So go subscribe and join to the pre-show on Talk Heathen TikTok. We want you to know what's going on in our community, so we have an updated website. You can go to www.atheist-community.org, where you can learn about the organization itself, its policies, and how you can get involved. We also want to hear from you. We want to know what you liked, what you thought was effective, and what you didn't like, and any feedback that you have. So please email us at tv@atheist-community.org. atheist-community.org and let us know. And something else for the email that I wanted to make sure that we mentioned is that I love all of the people and the support we get on this channel. As many of you know, I am a resident physician and I'm very busy a lot of the time. And so I do talk on the different social media apps with people frequently, but if you want to ask me a question, the best way to get me to respond to your question or your comment is to go to this email. So if you message me privately on one of the other apps, I probably won't see it. So if you want to ask a question, the email is the best way to do that. So with that, I think we have some more calls. We have an atheist caller. Helen, she, her from Florida, wants to talk about the veil of ignorance. How are you doing, Helen?
Good. How are both you and Richard doing?
I'm doing very, very well.
What you got for us today?
Yeah. So now, before I go into this, I'm still working this out in my brain. So if I can't articulate it 100% accurate with 100% accuracy, please, forgive me for that.
No problem.
But lately, I've been, a friend of mine posed this to me maybe like a couple weeks ago, and I've been kind of philosophizing and thinking about it for the past couple of weeks, and I wanted to get both of your takes on it about this veil of ignorance. And I think that the previous two callers, gave examples of it from a theist perspective, and I'm kind of going through it from this atheist place, that what seems very obvious to me and like simple solutions and things like, how the world is and stuff like that, to me, I feel like I should be able to explain that to somebody and then to take on even just a little bit of that perspective. But then I remind myself, I don't always do that either. So I'm trying to work through how do I come to deal with that discomfort and how I can be okay with people not seeing things the same way I do, and how the best deal with that cognitive dissonance we have as atheists, and how we're interacting in the world and how we interact with each other. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Go for it, Richard.
Oh, that's a very, very good question. When it comes to other people's cognitive dissonance, when it comes to not telling people as much as you possibly can to try and make them understand something you maybe think is simple, is basic, or even something very complicated that you're trying to simply explain to someone because they don't seem to have some knowledge that you have. That's very hard. That's my day job. I'm a science communicator or history communicator, or any kind of communicator by day, and it is very, very hard. And basically there are two things. There's one, that sometimes you can't just tell people things. Telling people things isn't the best way to get someone to know something. It's an old-fashioned idea of, just educate the masses and they'll know everything. It's not kind of how it works. And sometimes things more physical need to happen. You need to demonstrate stuff. But at the end of the day, you can use every technique in the world, and if they just won't take it in, some people just won't take it in, and there's nothing you can do. You've just got to accept, okay, maybe it'll sink in one day, maybe in a year they'll be thinking about it and a penny will drop, maybe it won't, who knows. So the only way you can deal with that discomfort is basically just to accept that not everybody's going to accept things, and kind of move on. So there's that. My own cognitive dissonance, that's a case of just asking yourself questions all the time. It's very hard to assume that you don't know everything. I know this sounds really arrogant, but we all think we know everything, even those of us who don't, especially those of us who don't. And so the best thing I think to do is to challenge things. There are times when I'll be writing for something, and there'll be a fact I've got to put down, which I actually did in my PhD thesis. I know it backwards, but I'll always look it up and check. Every time I'll go and check it and make sure it's right. And Ben was talking earlier about how he'll check he'll think this medical procedure is a simple thing, but he'll go and check with other people just to make sure. That kind of thing. There's a whole world out there that will help you check to see if you're right about something. And I think that's the best way, and that's the best you can do. And sometimes you might still get it wrong. Sometimes you might still be ignorant of something, but at least you've tried. At least you've tried to do it. And again, that's how you live with it. You say, I've done my best. And if I'm wrong, I'll correct myself later when I find out that I'm wrong. Until I find out myself I'm wrong, I don't know I'm wrong. But that's my answer to that. You've got to either, in the case of other people, you've got to accept that everybody will take everything you're going to say. And in the case of yourself, you've got to accept that there are unknown unknowns. There are things you don't even know that you don't know. And so just try and find them out if you can. And one day you'll find out. Does that help?
Yes, and because that's what I've been kind of dealing with like, because this is obvious stuff that I know, but like getting to a point to being okay with it is the hard part that I'm dealing with, and I've been dealing with it, since I came out of religion and became more of a skeptic, but now I'm becoming even more skeptical about like even my own perceptions of things, because it's very easy to be skeptical about someone making a claim that isn't true, but then you're sitting there with yourself and then you're skeptical about yourself. You're like, God damn it. And then you overthink things.
Yeah, it's a hard thing too, because I do my fair share of like science communication, because as a physician, like you have to do that. You have people coming to you for help and advice, and you need to find a way to communicate with them at a level that they're going to understand it and they're going to be able to make their own decisions about things. And it is very frustrating sometimes, because certain things that I know I've had years of study in, like it's pretty simple to me that like, yeah, I'm going to vaccinate my children if I ever have children, because it's simple to me. I understand why this needs to happen. But a lot of people, like, there's a lot of conspiracy theories going around because people don't have that understanding. And like Richard was saying, it's not enough often to just tell them what the right answer is, because I arrived at my position of knowing it's easy because of years and years of study. And the fundamentals that I had to learn to get there took a long time. And there are things that I know now as a physician that I didn't know at all when I was in pre-med. And I look back and I think, wow, no, I've come a long way. And if I feel like something is obvious, I think about, no, hold on. There was a time when I had to look up this very simple thing because I just didn't understand how it worked. But now I do. And so you have to be patient with people, and you have to understand that like they might not have the same experience that led them to the knowledge they currently have. And you can't just give that experience to somebody. And sometimes they have to go through that on their own. And I think a way to kind of help that is to kind of spark some curiosity in them, like get them to have their own idea to go learn more about it, because they might have to start off with some fundamental things, like even the simple questions of like, how do I know that what I believe is true? Like starting to process their own thought process and think like, why am I this confident? Like, because even getting them to ask themselves that question is the catalyst that will move them to go through the rest of those fundamental steps to get to skepticism. So I love strategies that rely on those simple questions that then you don't have to lecture them, because they're going to, like, at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones that will choose or not choose to undergo that shift in thought process on their own. So I love doing things like that. And it also kind of takes the burden off you a little bit, but I do understand that it can be frustrating. And then in terms of our own cognitive dissonance, like I love dissonance. Like, and it's oftentimes we view cognitive dissonance as something bad because we often associate it with the compensatory process afterwards of like, adhering to your belief more and like going against your feelings of like dissonance to affirm your viewpoint that you previously had. And like, yeah, that's not great. But the actual dissonance itself, like the discomfort, is great. I love it because it's a learning moment for me. Like, it tells me there's something here that I'm inconsistent about and I need to learn more. And so it just makes me very curious. I'm like, what's the actual answer? And then I go and dig deeper, and it's just like, and that's what drove me to medicine in general, was the idea that, like, I was taught something in school that turned out to be false. I'm like, no, but what's the actual answer? Like, that's super cool. And then you get down this rabbit trail and you can never stop. It's like every time you get this dissonance, you just move on and you keep learning. And so I've learned to love that feeling of where your mind is just blown because you're corrected on something that you just didn't know before. I thrive in that. And I hope that other people take that as well. Like, I think the discomfort is kind of fun. And I hope you can get there too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, going back to where we started, me talking about the way emotion and cognition wrap together. This is a great example of that, because this discomfort is your body telling you something without verbalizing it, that something's wrong, something is incorrect, something needs to change. And so the best thing to do is to go with it and embrace it. And if you embrace it often enough, you do learn to love being wrong, because every time you find out you're wrong, you learn what's right. And that's a wonderful feeling. I actually really like someone saying, that's not entirely accurate. And I go, why? Where am I wrong? And they'll tell me something. My mind goes, boom. I go, that's fantastic. That's just such the best feeling. And so go with it. When you feel that discomfort yourself for this cognitive dissonance, don't worry about it. It's trying to get you to, it's saying there's something about your belief system that's not right, and use it as a cue to investigate and boom, blow your mind with some new facts, because that's what will happen ultimately. Or you'll be right in the first place, in which case you'll feel really smug, which is also a nice feeling. Let's be honest. So
yeah, does that help?
No,
does that help?
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I really appreciate both of your perspective, because, I've been, hanging in the atheist circles for a while, and though we get into discussions, there is still that camaraderie and friendship there, that you might feel a little cognitive dissonance, but, it's just accepted. But now that I'm moving into a space where I'm going to be talking to theists more, I'm going to be dealing with a little bit of those emotions on my end and their end. And I want to come from this place of acknowledging their cognitive dissonance and mine, and come to an understanding between the two, so I can have more productive conversations. So I really appreciate both of you that have done this for a while, finding that place to do it. So I really, really appreciate that. And that's why I wanted to ask both of you that question.
Yeah, and I think along that point too, I think this will kind of be the last thing I'll say, but something that's fun, and I think I try to do a good job about this on the shows and when I talk to people, is modeling that behavior in the conversation. I think, like, if you're willing to be vulnerable and say, hey, I didn't know that thing, that's super cool, or like, I don't know this thing, and like having that curious mindset going into the conversation, that hopefully will open them up to having that same mindset and being more vulnerable with you and saying, oh, I actually don't know this thing. And then I think modeling that behavior for them and not coming at it with arrogance or not claiming to know more than is important to make that safe space to be wrong. And I think if we can all be willing to be wrong together, we're probably going to end up getting to a better place, because we can acknowledge where we were incorrect and acknowledge that I might be incorrect, and that's okay. So I think engaging like that is going to be very helpful. And not everybody will go with you there. Some people might still hold on to their position and not be willing to admit that they're wrong. But I find most of the time, if someone feels safe to be wrong, it's an easier conversation in general.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So, but thank you. I know it's getting toward the end of the show, but I just want to say thank you for answering my question and giving me some things to think about, and how that I can incorporate it into having better conversations. So I appreciate you both a lot, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for calling,
problem.
and I hope you have a good rest of your Sunday.
Me too.
All right. Got some more announcements for us. If you happen to be in the Austin area on July 30th, 2023, then please consider joining us for the live broadcast of Talk Heathen and the Atheist Experience. Talk Heathen this time is going to be hosted by Jamie Boone and Jamie the Blind Limey, and AXP will be hosted by Christy Powell and Objectively Dan. Doors open at noon, and we hope to see you there. And we have another call on the lines. This will be the last call of the day. This is Nadia, pronouns are she, her, from New York, and wants to talk about the risks of fundamentalists in government and the consequences for LGBT. Nadia, you are on the show. What would you like to talk about?
Hello. Yeah, I think people are sort of radically understating the consequences of, I guess, the fundies getting into the government and actually making laws against people. I mean, they actually, like, you know, put people in prison for gay sex, and when the sodomy laws get overturned, or sorry, ruling that said sodomy laws were unconstitutional gets overturned, and they'll also when they make being trans illegal, that will be very interesting. How exactly does someone stop being trans? They would probably not be satisfied with a trans woman cutting her hair short and wearing trousers. They're almost certainly going to force surgeries to reverse transitions, at least partially, on people. And they'll also put the people in prison, of course.
I'm gonna push back a little bit. I don't think they can.
Okay.
Like when they're going to, if we get to a place where they decide to ban trans people in general, I don't think they can force surgeries. They can't force a surgery or a reversal of surgery on anybody. What would happen? It's very dangerous, because what they would do and are starting to do is, of course, ban healthcare for trans people. It's going to force people in the closet, and it's going to be especially dangerous for people who have already had a surgery, because they're not going to be able to force you to reverse a surgery. But if they take away hormones from somebody who has had surgery that can no longer produce their own sex hormones, then they're going to have some pretty severe consequences, because they won't be able to replace the hormones they used to have anymore. So that's the big thing that I see being the problem. But yeah, it's absolutely scary that we're at a place where people are injecting their viewpoints on this into policy.
Well, a million people is not that many to mass in prison, and they can track trans people down pretty quickly with searches for changes in gender markers and so on.
Yeah, they can.
Through,
yeah, the prison thing is likelier as well.
The forced surgery, actually, I believe, is regarded as constitutional. There was like Skinner v. Oklahoma, I think, that said for the sake of punitive things, that a surgery would not be correct. But in the line of reasoning that is pretty easily available, they would be doing it to halt the commission of the crime, as opposed to being punitive per se. So
the conflict, though, is even if, like, and I'm not going to weigh in necessarily on whether or not a surgery is constitutional, because I'm not an attorney. I'm not an expert in that, but we do have a conflict there with the medical ethics standards, and like that's where the issue is. So even if it's constitutional theoretically to perform a forced surgery, it's still not medically ethical, and doctors would not be able to do that to somebody. So,
Well,
especially
I guess
adults.
the trick is, of course, there are doctors like Paul McHugh and so on who are going to take a different.
They could take a different stance. They still, no matter what your stance on it is, you cannot force a surgery on somebody. Like, it doesn't matter what your viewpoint is, and that's the same with any surgeries. Like, you can't force. Like, even take an example of circumcision, which is, I don't agree with circumcision, but some people do. But it's not the doctor weighing in on their opinion of circumcision. It's the parents who are the ones that are able to medically consent for their child. And that's where the issue comes down to. Like, even if a doctor wants to circumcise or not circumcise a baby, it's not up to the doctor at that point. It still relates to medical autonomy of the parents of the child who are able to give consent. So, like, it's very sticky. And, like, so even if you had a doctor that wanted to do something, you still cannot force a medical procedure at all.
Historically, I mean, lobotomies and I believe also castration was done to mental patients against their wills, and so yeah,
and that's no longer viewed as medically ethical. Right. So again, this is a conflict of medical ethics. So we've established very clear guidelines for medical ethics nowadays. And what were those ethics in the past may have been different, and they were often like less defined. But in modern day medicine, there are certain things that, like, unless we had a massive change in how medical ethics is viewed, which I don't really see that happening, because of the fact, especially that the medical boards and the medical organizations are all in favor of the current guidelines that we have. I don't see that being as likely to actually happen. It would be more fringe cases, which is a problem. Like, I agree, those fringe cases that would happen would be a problem. But that's why I am going to push back on their ability to force surgery.
They can keep somebody in prison until they submit to getting the surgeries as well. So basically saying they're still actively committing the crime by having their body in that state.
I have a lot of questions on this. I think you need to maybe call in when somebody who's more legally knowledgeable is on, because there's a lot of things here, but a lot of it too is going to depend on what specifically is defined as the criminal act. Because that's a huge bag of worms that we'd have to deal with. And even a lot of the legislation as it is now is not it doesn't always agree on those terms too. So I think maybe we need to have this discussion with somebody that is more legally minded, because I don't want to necessarily go in that direction, because I just don't know. But I think I still stand with my perspective from the medical ethics standpoint and what would be more likely to happen there. And you can disagree with me, and I don't know what's going to happen, but that's at least where I'm a little bit reassured.
Yeah, well, that's not very much reassurance, because mass imprisonment is still pretty bad.
No, that's a big issue. But I think there is a problem when we start adding more layers that aren't necessarily going to be a contributing factor. I think if we're going to maintain skepticism, we need to not go down certain trails that we don't really have reason to believe either. So I think the whole situation isn't reassuring necessarily, but there's certain aspects that we don't need to add on to the issue without really investigating that. So that's really all I'm saying. So
they've been caught on tape talking. So, I mean, we can get ideas of what their intentions are, and they have, I guess, things like 100% desistance as one of their goals for trans people, which means something medically.
Right, but again, there's so many layers here about definitions, and are these definitions going to be consistent and all that? I think maybe we need to pick up this conversation a different time with somebody that is more legally minded, because I mean, as much as I want to have this conversation, I just don't know how far we're going to get without unpacking a lot of this. And I think since we're at the end of the show, I don't think we have the time to really go into this. So I think,
well,
is there anything
pushing out of
kind
public
of?
life,
Yeah, I'll kind of wrap this up. I'll let you.
Like, quote unquote, pushing out of public life is a dramatic understatement of the actual threat. And I don't think it's productive to be understated like that regarding it.
And that's not, I'm not understating the threat. Like, I'm not saying that that we don't need to worry, but what I'm saying is there are some layers here that I think are a bit exaggerated. Right. So I'm trying to be careful with where our thought process goes on this. And there's certain parts of this that do need to be talked about a lot more, and certain things that are more immediately important, and others that we can put on the back burner for now while we handle these more pressing issues. Right. So I think we're going to end the show for today, but thank you for calling in.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
I wasn't gonna chime in then, being a cis Brit. I can do very little about what's going on in the States, other than support you with money and things.
Yeah, it's a very sticky thing. And as much as I want to have that conversation, it's one that I want to be sure that everything that I say is going to be accurate.
Yeah.
And I'm just not a legal expert. So I'm going to be hesitant to really jump into a lot of that. So we have a couple more super chats. We have from Heng Fa Shi, gives $10, saying, as doctors, have you ever looked into the pharmacology happening when these myths were formed? Do you think it would benefit the anti-apologist to be more familiar with the rampant use in those days? Well, Richard's not a medical doctor, so nope. I don't know if he is familiar with pharmacology. I do look into the medicine of certain myths and how they happen. I have made videos in the past, specifically about like elf myths and vampire myths and how those were impacted by medical conditions. But Richard, have you looked into this?
I have. My first degree was in history. I was a Cambridge guy, and I did witches, so I know the link between certain witch crazes and ergot, which is an interesting hypothesis that the witch crazes were caused by a particular hallucinogen found on rye and eaten in the bread. It's not one I completely agree with, because there's so many other factors to the witch crazes other than people being high. But I do think it's an interesting thing to consider, to know about the ways that the medical, elements of these things. I have colleagues who study, again, werewolves. My field again. The werewolf, one of the sources of werewolves is a book by Robert Burton called The Anatomy of Melancholy. Huge book from the mid-17th century. And it says one of the descriptions of feeling melancholia is that you start to turn into a wolf. So it's, there are these medical explanations for these things. But when we talk about these myths, are we talking about the original religious myths? Do you think people saw Jesus? I'm curious to know whether they think people saw Jesus back alive again because they were drinking a little too much or anything. But it's an interesting field. I just don't think it's the strongest part of anti-apologetics. I'll stop there before I carry on waffling about ergot.
We have one more super chat from Google Eats. I think I know who this person is. There's somebody I've seen before that will change their Google name to this. Gives $4.99 and said, did someone here order a pizza? And now I really want a pizza. But thank you, Google Eats. I hope my pizza is on the way. But before we wrap up the show, I'm going to give us a few more announcements. Have you ever said to yourself, I really love the content the ACA creates, but I wish there was a way I could get it all the time? we've got you covered. We now have two 24/7 live streams. AXP TV delivers a constant stream of shows, clips, and specials from over the 26 seasons of the Atheist Experience. And now we have AEN TV that provides you with clips from all the other shows of the Atheist Experience Network, like Talk Heathen, Truth Wanted, and Secular Sexuality, and many others. Watch or simply listen to your favorite hosts and discover some hosts that you've never heard of. And you can find that by going to tiny.cc/AXPTV and tiny.cc/AENTV to join in the fun. So just a reminder, the prompt for this week for Talk Heathen to me is, what are you calling dibs on when the Christians get raptured? You can reply in the comments and tune in at the beginning of next week's episode to hear the top 3 answers. And again, if you want to support this content and everything that the ACA does, you can like the video and subscribe to the channel. Become a channel member by clicking the join button below the video. Support us on Patreon at tiny.cc/PatreonTH, and you can possibly become one of the top 5 patrons of the week and unseat one of the people that we read off their name every week. We also have a channel that houses all of the shows of the ACA in audio podcast form, so visit tiny.cc/AEN podcast. You can become a part of the Talk Heathen community in our fan-run Facebook page at tiny.cc/FBTHG. If you would like to continue the discussion in the after show, join us in ACD, our fan-run Discord server at tiny.cc/ACD Discord. And there are some people here that are way more important than Richard and me because they put everything together for all of the shows every week. They're here almost every single day, getting the audio ready, getting the video ready, getting the clips up, putting in the timestamps for calls, doing all of this work behind the scenes. So let's shout out the crew. Let's go to the crew cam. And there they are. We got Crew Cat and our lovely, lovely crew. Thank you for being here.
Yay.
And somebody else I want to, well, multiple somebodies that I also want to thank are the viewers, because obviously this would not be a show without the audience, and it would just be us talking to ourselves every Sunday and other days that we have shows. So thank you, everybody who was here with us today, watching and giving support in the chat. We love to see you here. And whether or not you believe, if you're an essential worker, please continue doing what you're doing. We absolutely need your hard work. I hope that you get some encouragement other than this on a weekly basis. I hope that your efforts are appreciated. And if you don't believe, this is your community. You can join us in the Discord, join us on those Facebook groups. And I hope to keep seeing you all in the chat, have this community. We need each other, and especially in times where things are uncertain or we don't always have answers, and maybe we're distressed because we don't have answers. You have people that you can talk to, and we are here to go through this with you. So if you do believe, we don't hate you. We're just not convinced. Bye, everybody.
We want the truth, so watch Truth Wanted live Friday at 7 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTW and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/calltw.